night once. So from July onwards, it will be once every 2 weeks. So I think by this month end, we'll be completing all the PDFs. All of them had a chance to present once at least. And this time we are moving on to a very important topic which you come across in day-to-day practice. That is epilepsy, which is associated with other comorbidities. And people keep talking about pediatric epilepsy at length in various sessions, but they seldom give any importance to what happens during the second peak, that is during the latter part of life. That is something which happens after 60 is uh, called epilepsy elderly. You know that there are two peaks which in which epilepsy is common. So these are the two topics now, and we have Chitra alumni for that. All three of them, that is Dr. Pandurang, Dr. Prashant, and Dr. Jitapam. They did their DM in Chitra, and further to that, they did their postdoctoral fellowship in epilepsy as well. So first, we will hear from Prashant. Prashant is now assistant professor in Jubilee Mission Medical College, Thrissur, and he will be enlightening us on what should we do when someone has a hepatic and a renal impairment and they develop seizures. So let's hear from Prashant first. The time is 20 minutes, but as I said earlier, don't rush through, and um, we wish to hear from you. Yes, Prashant.
Am I audible?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so I'll start. So first of all, let me thank the organizers for providing me with the opportunity.
No
I'm
organizers here.
Organizer.
Okay. So, no organizer also. It's a combined teamwork.
Thank you. The topic is AEDs in hepatic and renal impairment. It's not moving to the next slide.
You can just try
Yes,
to exit and the
try
arrow is
once
visible,
more.
sir.
Yeah,
Okay, coming.
it's moving. Thank you. Yeah. So, scope of the topic: occurrence of seizures in the presence of hepatic and renal disease is not uncommon in clinical practice. These patients are all the more prone because of secondary electrolyte and metabolic disturbances and other comorbidities. Most of the drugs that we use have an altered pharmacokinetics in these patients. Classic antiepileptic drugs like phenytoin, carbamazepine, valproate are mostly eliminated through hepatic metabolism. Most of the newer drugs, kidneys plays a much more important role in their elimination, offering a better alternative to patients with liver disease. Dialysis further modify these pharmacokinetic parameters because of the significant removal of the drug, especially if these drugs are highly dialysable or extractable. From a pharmacokinetic point of view, arbitrarily, these drugs can be classified. Antiepileptic drugs can be classified into three. This is an arbitrary classification. Drugs that are removed almost exclusively by hepatic metabolism, drugs that are eliminated predominantly by the kidneys, and drugs that are eliminated by either routes. Drugs that are removed almost exclusively by hepatic metabolism. As already mentioned, it is already drugs like phenytoin, carbamazepine, and valproate comes into this category. Phenytoin is completely absorbed. Peak level is reached within around 6 hours. Phenytoin is 90% protein bound. What is more important, the 10% free fraction is responsible for the pharmacological action. So patients who have hypoalbuminemia, irrespective of the etiology, let it be hepatic renal or nutritional hypoalbuminemia, when we are giving the conventional dose of phenytoin itself, they can go into toxicity because of the increased unbound fraction. Moreover, when we are doing the therapeutic drug level monitoring, most often it is a total level that is measured. So patient can have toxicity with normal drug level monitoring in the setting of hypoalbuminemia. So that also has to be remembered. Elimination of phenytoin is almost exclusively by hepatic biotransformation by a process called glucuronidation, with less than 5% of the total dose is eliminated and changed in the urine. Given its high protein binding and poor water solubility, phenytoin is poorly dialysable, and in most cases, supplemental doses after dialysis are not necessary. Coming to valproate, hepatic metabolism is the main route of elimination for valproate, with less than 5% excreted unchanged in the urine. Very high protein binding, similar to phentoin, predominantly to albumins. Dose supplementation after dialysis is generally not necessary. So from a pharmacokinetic point of view, phentoin and valproate are almost the same. Carbamazepine again is well absorbed, 80% plasma bound, mostly to globulins. In terms of elimination, carbamazepine is eliminated almost exclusively by hepatic metabolism. So these three drugs, phenytoin, valproate, and carbamazepine, are almost excreted predominantly by hepatic metabolism. And these drugs are safe in renal failure, but in hepatic impairment, they may be used, but at least 50% reduced dose, and drug has to be increased or decreased depending upon the therapeutic drug level monitoring. The only newer AD which comes in this category may be brivaracetam. Brivaracetam is a selective, at least 15 times more selective than levetiracetam, high affinity synaptic vesicle protein to a ligand. Brivaracetam is rapidly and highly absorbed with peak plasma concentration reached within about 2 hours, one of the fastest orally acting antiepileptic drug. Brivaracetam is eliminated primarily by metabolism in the liver, and only less than 10% of the dose is excreted as parent compound in the urine. So if you look into the FDA prescribing information, in the section of hepatic impairment, dose adjustment is recommended for all stages of hepatic impairment. Usual starting dose is 50 milligram twice daily. In cases of any hepatic impairment, dose has to be brought down to 25 milligram twice daily. And the drug is considered safe in renal failure. So we complete the first group, that is largely metabolized by liver, phentoin, carbamazepine, valproate, and brivaracetam. Now come to the second group, drugs that are not metabolized much and almost exclusively excreted by kidneys. Predominantly two drugs comes in this category. One is topiramate, other is vigabatrin. Topiramate is not extensively metabolized. Around 80% of the drug is recovered unchanged in the urine. So in subjects with renal failure, any creatinine clearance less than 70, a 50% reduction of the usual adult dose is recommended. Topiramate is cleared by hemodialysis. So additional dose supplementation after hemodialysis is indicated in patients on topiramate. Next is vigabatrin, not significantly metabolized, predominantly excreted through urine. Maintenance dose of vigabatrin should be reduced by 25, 50, and 75% in the presence of mild, moderate, or severe renal failure, respectively. Two more drugs comes in this category, that is pregabalin and gabapentin. So drugs predominantly excreted by kidney are topiramate, vigabatrin, gabapentin, and pregabalin. Come to the next set of drugs, drugs that are metabolized in the body and excreted through kidney. So these involve both liver as well as kidney. Coming to the first drug, phenobarbital. Phenobarbital is well absorbed. Around 2/3 of the drug is metabolized in the liver, and around 1/3 of the drug is excreted unchanged in urine. Not much studies, but the drug is largely considered safe in moderate liver or renal failure. Coming to oxcarbazepine. We know that carbamazepine is metabolized extensively in liver, and there is not much role for kidney in metabolism of carbamazepine, but that is not the story of oxcarbazepine. Both oxcarbazepine and eslicarbazepine are, though metabolized in liver, their prodrugs are active, and these active metabolites are excreted through kidney. So the recommendation goes creatinine clearance more than 30, no dose adjustment. Creatinine clearance 10 and 30, 50% reduction of the target dose. Creatinine clearance less than 10, that is almost the degree of end-stage renal disease, better avoided or use a still smaller dose. And oxcarbazepine is considered to be safe in mild and moderate liver cirrhosis, whereas carbamazepine is unsafe and dose has to be reduced in mild and moderate liver cirrhosis. So that is the difference between carbamazepine and oxcarbazepine. Coming to levetiracetam. Unlike brivaracetam, which is metabolized predominantly through the liver, levetiracetam is mostly eliminated through the kidneys. Approximately 1/3 of the dose is metabolized in the body, in blood as well as liver through a mechanism called hydrolysis, and 2/3 is excreted in urine unmetabolized. Half-life of the drug is around 8 hours. It becomes 10 hours in the presence of mild renal failure and 24 hours in the presence of end-stage renal disease. Serious dose adjustments are necessary depending upon the severity of the renal failure in levetiracetam. This is from the prescribing information. The usual dose we give twice daily. In end-stage renal disease, it has to be given only once daily. Patients on dialysis and stage renal disease use once daily. In between mild and moderate renal failure, reduce the dose by around 50%. Following a dialysis, 250 or 500 milligram supplemental dose is recommended because around 50% of the drug pool of levetiracetam is removed after 4 hours of proper hemodialysis. Liver cirrhosis that does not affect the elimination of the levetiracetam significantly. It is one of the safest drugs to be used in liver cirrhosis. Lacosamide is completely absorbed. It has high bioavailability. It is eliminated by combination of hepatic and renal metabolism, but the most important is hepatic metabolism for lacosamide. For the prescribing information, dose adjustment is recommended for patients with severe renal impairment, and dose adjustment is recommended for patients with mild or moderate hepatic impairment. Use in severe hepatic impairment is not recommended. Reduction of 25% of the target dose is recommended for lacosamide in severe renal impairment and mild or moderate hepatic impairment. Perampanel, again, is completely absorbed, one of the drug with longest half-life. Perampanel is metabolized extensively by glucuronidation, and metabolites are excreted through kidney. Moderate renal and hepatic impairment, drug can be used with caution with very slow up titration. Usually we start with 2 milligram and up titrated, that is made 4 milligram after a week. In patients with mild or moderate hepatic or renal impairment, up titration has to be slow, once in every 2 weeks, and avoided in advanced liver and renal failure. Usual recommended dose, maximum dose is 12 milligram. In any hepatic impairment, it has to be brought down to 6 milligram. Slow up titration, peak dose also is less. Now, anti-epileptic drugs that are at high risk of being extracted by hemodialysis include predominantly lacosamide, levetiracetam, and topiramate. These are the drugs with less protein binding. Dose supplementation is usually necessary in these cases, as around 50% of the drug is removed after hemodialysis and patient is prone for seizures if not supplemented an adequate dose. To sum up, drugs that are eliminated unchanged by the kidney or undergo minimal metabolism are topiramate, vigabatrin, pregabalin, gabapentin also comes in this picture, will require major dose adjustments at least by 50% in patients with renal insufficiency. They are better avoided in advanced liver disease, advanced renal disease, and they are safe in liver dysfunction. Drugs eliminated predominantly by biotransformation, that is phenytoin, valproate, carbamazepine, and brivaracetam. 2 more drugs, tiagabine and rufinamide. These drugs are at significant risk of accumulation with advanced hepatic disease. They may be used, but at low dose, and better avoided in advanced liver disease. Drugs in the intermediate, rest all drugs comes in the intermediate group. They have to be used and dose has to be adjusted depending upon the individual pharmacokinetic profile of each drug, as already mentioned. I will briefly touch upon the renal and hepatic toxicity of the anti-epileptic drugs too. As such, no anti-epileptic drug is nephrotoxic. 2 renal side effects can occur, out of which one is Fanconi syndrome. Available literature demonstrates that valproate can cause renal proximal tubular dysfunction. Mechanism leading to renal dysfunction is said to be a direct toxic effect of valproate on the proximal convoluted tubule mitochondria. If you search the literature, once in 3 years, such a case report will come. This is from epilepsy. Fanconi syndrome appears to be rare, but severe consequences of long-term valproate therapy. Therefore, patients treated with valproate should be checked regularly for the possible development of VP-induced Fanconi. These patients present like any other proximal tubular dysfunction with metabolic acidosis, hypokalemia, glycosuria, etc. Another renal side effect of anti-epileptic drug is AID-induced nephrolithiasis. All drugs inhibiting carbonic anhydrase decrease the blood pH, that is cause metabolic acidosis, normally a normal anion gap metabolic acidosis, and increase the urine pH. Urine is made alkaline. Citric acid excretion is reduced, forming citrate stones. Topiramate, acetazolamide, and zonisamide can cause that. Patients on concurrent carbonic anhydrase inhibition and those with a prior history of kidney stones and patients on ketogenic diet are said to be at more risk for AID-induced nephrolithiasis. Nephrolithiasis in topiramate users was once studied. 75 patients, 300 milligram was the median dose. Median treatment duration was 48 months. History of symptomatic lithiasis was 10.7%. Asymptomatic lithiasis was 20%. So if there are risk factors, it is better to follow up these patients for the development of renal stones. And come to the last part, hepatotoxicity of the anti-epileptic drugs. As predominantly metabolized in the liver, phenytoin, carbamazepine, and valproate are hepatotoxic, out of which all can cause hepatocellular hepatotoxicity. Cholestatic hepatotoxicity is not seen with valproate. Hepatotoxicity of phenytoin carbamazepine is a bit different from that of valproate. Phenytoin carbamazepine structurally are aromatic anti-epileptic drugs. So these causes DRESS syndrome. Chronic mild liver enzyme elevation, that is less than 3 times the upper limit of normal. Anything more than 3 times the upper limit of normal SGPT is what is considered as hepatotoxicity. Any SGPT elevation less than that is seen very commonly with phenytoin carbamazepine. Incidence is around 10%. More than 70% of the hepatotoxic reactions from phenytoin carbamazepine occur as a part of reactive metabolite syndrome that is characterized by rash, eosinophilia, lymphadenopathy, hepatosplenomegaly, hepatotoxicity, etc. So most of the hepatotoxicity of phenytoin carbamazepine usually occur in the setting of a DRESS reactive metabolite syndrome or anticonvulsant hypersensitivity syndrome. Very few cases of irreversible fatal hepatotoxicity as well as chronic liver injury also has been described, but these are in fact very, very rare. Patients who experience reactive metabolic syndrome typically have recurrent hepatotoxicity when rechallenged. So an absolute contraindication to restart phenytoin carbamazepine is a prior history of hepatotoxicity and a drug rash. Coming to valproate, valproate is primarily metabolized by glucuronidation and beta oxidation. It is also metabolized by cytochrome P450 through omega oxidation, but that is usually not a major pathway of metabolism. Omega oxidation increases when the P450 system is induced by other medications, especially the P450 inducers, and results in the production of 4N valproate. This 4N valproate has been implicated in most valproate-induced hepatotoxicity. So polypharmacy with concurrent inducers increases the risk of valproate-induced hepatotoxicity because of the increased formation of 4N valproate. Valproate-induced hepatotoxicity is rare, idiosyncratic, and commonly occurs within the first 3 months of use. In the FDA boxed warning for valproate, LFT should be performed prior to therapy and at frequent intervals thereafter, especially during the first 6 months. Calculated risk of hepatotoxicity of specific antiepileptic drug. Carbamazepine, it is very rare, maybe 1 in 1 lakh. Phenytoin, 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 50,000. And children are less susceptible, adults are more susceptible for phenytoin. Valproate, monotherapy, it is 1 in 45,000 in adults, probably less than phenytoin. But polytherapy, children less than 2 years with enzyme-inducing drugs, the risk of hepatotoxicity from valproate is 1 in 500. So any POLG1 mutation, polytherapy, children with developmental delay, especially on other inducing drugs of P450 cytosolic enzymes, these patients are at more risk for valproate-induced hepatotoxicity. With that, let me conclude. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Prashant. I think we kept the time. It's only 17 minutes. So 1 minute, can you conclude on the newer ADs? And I think most of the people know about the older generation ADs, but the newer ADs, can you just conclude on their hepatic and renal toxicity or their metabolism? Very briefly, because we have 2 minutes or 3 minutes more.
Among the newer ADs, the one which is predominantly metabolized by liver is only brivaracetam. Restol, that is predominantly by liver. Restol is, levetiracetam is predominantly by kidney. Brivaracetam is predominantly by liver. Levetiracetam is predominantly by kidney. Restol is by a combination of liver and kidney, and they are in general contraindicated in advanced liver and hepatic impairment, and may be used in mild and moderate liver and renal dysfunction with caution.
Okay. So that is wonderful. I think, as usual, Prashant is always very crisp. I still remember his case files and all. When people write 4 or 5 pages, Prashant will be writing just 1 page, and that will have everything. So I think Jeevan is also here. People who were his batchmates know that well. And I hope your Encorate Chrono spelling is now, the H has been removed. So that is something between Prashant and me. So now we'll move on to Dr. Pandurang. He'll be talking on the next search, that is epilepsy in the elderly, which is also again a very important topic. So let's hear from Dr. Pandurang. He is working in Orient Super Specialty Hospital. The something about Pandu is that he has taken 2 major subspecialties, that is epilepsy and stroke, and he's an interventional stroke specialist as well. So I welcome Pandu to the group. Yeah, he's in Aurangabad, and Pandu did with Gopal and Malcolm. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, postdoctoral fellowship was with Dr. Malcolm and Dr. Gopal. So welcome, Pandu.
Good evening, everyone. So the next talk is the second surge, epilepsy in elderly. So the scheme of my presentation will be a brief introduction about epidemiology, etiology, and the risk factors for epilepsy in elderly patients. What are the common presentations and types of seizures? The differential diagnosis, diagnostic evaluation, and the major part of the talk will be on the management of epilepsy in elderly patients. So coming to the introduction, so elderly, as generally it is defined as the patients over 60 to 65 years of age, and the incidence and the prevalence of epilepsy is high in this age group. And because of progressive increase in the life
Sir, can you,
expectancy,
sorry to disturb you. Your video is off, sir. Video. Kindly on your video.
Yeah, so it's better to have the video so that we can see you.
I think I will have to exit from the presentation.
No, your face actually. You have an option of a stop video, no? You just press on that.
Yeah, I've shared my video now. I'm not visible now.
Sir, now.
No.
Now, okay, sir. You can. It's coming, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, because of increase in the life expectancy, this subgroup represents a rapidly growing segment of patients with epilepsy. So, epilepsy in elderly differs in as compared to that of young adults in terms of etiology, clinical presentation, and manifestations. Therefore, sometimes the diagnosis of epilepsy can be very challenging in these patients. There may be several factors like patient-related factors or physician-related factors or investigation-related factors, which can make either overdiagnosis or underdiagnosis of epilepsy in elderly patients quite common. And management of epilepsy in these patients is also challenging because of multiple factors like age-related biological changes, physiological changes, associated comorbidities, presence of cognitive decline, and as well as the most important is polypharmacy. Many of these patients are on multiple medications leading to drug-drug interactions. So coming to the epidemiology, if you see this figure, the incidence and the prevalence of epilepsy is high is in elderly. It has bimodal incidence, but it is highest in elderly people. The annual incidence described in various studies varies from 127 to 134 per lakh population, when the prevalence rate is around 1.5% in elderly people. So because of increase in the life expectancy, this number of the number of patients with epilepsy in elderly is likely to increase further. 30% of patients with seizures with epilepsy in elderly patients present with status epilepticus. And with respect to the prevalence of drug resistance in drug-resistant epilepsy in elderly patients as compared to that of younger adults, although the data is available is less, but the prevalence is likely to be less in elderly patients. And elderly people with epilepsy is likely to have three times greater mortality as compared to that of general populations. Coming to the etiology of the seizures, whether it's acute symptomatic seizure or a new onset epilepsy in elderly above 60 years of age, the cerebrovascular disease is the most common etiological factors in these patients, amounting about more than 50% of these patients. This is followed by neurodegenerative disorders like dementia, cerebral neoplasm, remote traumatic brain injury are the etiological factors in new onset epilepsy in this elderly age group. With respect to stroke and seizures, the early post-stroke seizures and the late post-stroke seizures and epilepsy need to be differentiated because of its presumed pathophysiology as well as the risk of recurrence of seizures. The risk factors for early post-stroke seizures are hemorrhagic transformation of ischemic stroke, presence of hyperglycemia and alcoholism, while that of late post-stroke seizures and epilepsy is age below 60, recurrent strokes, history of early post-stroke seizures. And the risk factors which are common to both early as well as late post-stroke seizures is the size of the anterior circulation infarct, hemorrhagic strokes, cortical involvement of the strokes, and clinical severity. This diagram represents the clinical manifestations of epilepsy or the types of seizures in patients with elderly patients with epilepsy. The most common type in nearly 40 to 50% of the patients, it is focal onset with impaired awareness seizures, previously called as complex partial seizure, followed by bilateral tonic-clonic seizures. The generalized seizures with presumed genetic origin or primary generalized epilepsy has been described in elderly patients, but it is the incidence is quite low. So
What happened, Ramesh?
as
Yeah.
It got stuck.
frequent in elderly as compared to the adults.
There is a network issue on your side.
Can you give a call to Pandu?
Yeah.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Actually, there is a network issue. So the clinical characteristics is different in elderly patients as compared to that of adults in terms of aura and automatism are less reported as compared to the younger adults. The motor features are also infrequent. And hello,
Screen is actually hanging, sir.
I think there is a network issue.
Okay. Okay. Screen is fine.
Uh, Also, the semiology of focal impaired awareness seizures is very simpler and shorter in elderly patients. And the subtle episodes of transient confusion can be more frequent as a manifestation of seizures as compared to adults in elderly. With respect to post-ictal state like confusion, aphasia, or paresis, is likely to last for longer duration in elderly as compared to adults. Therefore, the differentiation between the post-ictal state and the delirium can be sometimes very challenging in elderly. Status epilepticus, in about 30% of the patients, it may be the first seizure manifestation as a status epilepticus. And ischemic stroke is the most common cause of status epilepticus in elderly. And majority of these patients have non-convulsive status epilepticus, and it can mimic delirium, psychosis, or unexplained coma. Therefore, one should keep high index of suspicion of status epilepticus whenever an elderly, a known case of epilepsy present with altered sensorium. So risk factors for status epilepticus are previous history of seizures, cerebrovascular disease, presence of non-vascular dementia, and acute medical illness like some cardiac, respiratory, or hepatic impairment, hyper or hyponatremia. The mortality associated with status epilepticus is quite high, ranging from 35 to 50% depending upon the age. Coming to treatment of status epilepticus, some treatment consideration needs to be given. According to a recent systemic review, there is the data regarding the treatment of status epilepticus in elderly is not very much available, but whatever the data is available is that suggests that the reversible etiology should be sought promptly and should be corrected, because nearly 50% of the patients, they do have acute precipitating illness, and that needs to be addressed. One should avoid the aggressive administration of anti-epileptic drugs as compared to that of younger adults, because it may lead to greater neurotoxicity and altered sensorium may worsen further. Choice of anti-epileptic drug should be individualized according to the age of the patient, previous response to anti-epileptic drug, potential for drug interactions, and comorbidities. The monitoring of anti-epileptic drug serum levels may be appropriate in these patients with status epilepticus to guide further pharmacotherapy. Phenobarbital should be avoided because of its greater potential of adverse events as well as drug interactions. There are small studies which have documented the efficacy and tolerability of IV levetiracetam, IV valproate, and IV lacosamide in elderly patients with status epilepticus. So, what are the common presentations and differential diagnosis? So, many a times making an accurate diagnosis of epilepsy in elderly patients can be challenging, and most of the the reasons behind this is like many of these elderly patients, they live alone, eyewitness is not available, they may have associated cognitive impairment or other comorbidities, there may be some physician related problems, like the doctor may not be well versed with the seizures. The underdiagnosis or the overdiagnosis of the seizures is quite possible, because, for example, a patient presenting with a syncopal attack may have a transient jerk, myoclonic jerk, or incontinence, and it may be misinterpreted as seizures. And investigation related, like low sensitivity and specificity of routine EEG. So common presentations are like fall with or without loss of consciousness, confusional state or memory disturbance, focal neurological symptoms, and seizures may be predominantly in the sleep, leading to differential diagnosis of sleep disorders, abnormal movements, or some psychiatric manifestations may be there. So depending upon that, one should be aware of other differential diagnoses also, like syncope, delirium, dementia if the patient presents with confusion or memory disturbance. And focal neurological symptoms are there. One should be aware of transient ischemic attacks, and these are the differential diagnoses. So, confirming or excluding epilepsy in elderly patients, the investigations are usual, like scalp EEG, but the sensitivity and specificity in this age group is quite low. Neuroimaging is must for most of these patients, because most of these patients have symptomatic epilepsy and underlying pathology needs to be identified. Video is required in some patients to identify if the patient has atypical events and frequency of these events is high, and differentiation between epileptic and non-epileptic events. Coming to the treatment, which is the most important aspect of this talk, is the most important decision is when to treat. If the patient presents with prolonged seizures, and the treatment of underlying cause may be sufficient, and usually patient may not require a long-term anti-epileptic drugs. If the patient presents with unprovoked seizures, then we have to see whether the patient has a single or recurrent seizures. In many of times in young adults, what we do is, if the patient has a single seizures and there are no other pathology, if EEG and imaging is normal, we try to wait for starting anti-epileptic drugs. But in elderly patients with single seizure, they are high risk for recurrence. And if the seizure is partial seizures, that may reflect that there is underlying pathology, and that suggests the risk for recurrence is high. And if the patient gets recurrent seizures, it may be associated with fall and trauma. So sometimes it may be judicial to start anti-epileptic drug in elderly people even after a single seizure. So if the patient presents with recurrent seizures, recurrent unprovoked seizures, then clearly anti-epileptic drugs are required. So what is the pharmacological approaches? So The initial treatment should be with single drug as far as possible with monotherapy. And the choice of specific antiepileptic drug depends on number of factors like efficacy and the type of the seizures and epilepsy syndrome the patient has, and efficacy of antiepileptic drug against the type of the seizure, potential for side effects, the physiological changes associated with aging, drug interactions, presence of comorbidities, need for rapid titration if the patient has recurrent multiple episodes of seizures, and the cost of the treatment. So, because of higher rate and intensity of adverse events in elderly, one should start at low doses and one should go slow. As we have seen, the first talk, we have seen that many older drugs are associated, they are enzyme inducers, and they can increase the metabolism of other drugs and decrease the levels, like warfarin, statins, and antihypertensive drug levels may decrease. And the valproate inhibits the hepatic metabolism and can increase the blood levels of serum levels of other antiepileptic drugs and other drugs. Phenytoin and carbamazepine can affect atrioventricular conduction and should be used with caution in patients with cardiac arrhythmias. Phenytoin, carbamazepine, phenobarbital are commonly associated with osteoporosis, which is a common problem in this elderly age group. So, because of this, first generation antiepileptic are associated with many problems. One should look after the new anti-epileptic drugs which can be offered to these patients. So, what is the evidence of new anti-epileptic drugs from different studies? So, these are the few randomized clinical trials. So, this here you can see in the first trial, the first trial with, from the 18 centers from the Veterinary Affairs Medical Centers from the USA. 593 elder patients were included in this trial, and they divided randomly were assigned to three groups. Group 1 with lamotrigine, group 2 gabapentin, and group 3 carbamazepine. The rate of discontinuation was significantly higher in patients on carbamazepine as compared to that of lamotrigine and gabapentin. However, there was no significant difference between lamotrigine and gabapentin for seizure freedom. However, they were less effective as compared to that of carbamazepine. So, authors concluded the newer antiepileptic drugs like lamotrigine and gabapentin are preferred initial monotherapy to that of carbamazepine for newly diagnosed epilepsy in elderly because of better tolerability. The another study from UK lamotrigine elderly study group, where 150 elderly patients were randomized to two groups, lamotrigine or carbamazepine. The duration of follow-up was around 24 weeks. In this study, they have seen that rate of discontinuation due to adverse event was significantly higher in carbamazepine group as compared to lamotrigine. In terms of efficacy, they have showed that lamotrigine maybe a little bit better as compared to that of carbamazepine in last 18 weeks of follow-up with respect to seizure control, but that was not statistically significant. So the author concluded that new anti-epileptic drug lamotrigine is better as initial monotherapy than carbamazepine for a newly diagnosed epilepsy in elderly because of better tolerability. Similarly, there were two another randomized clinical control trials. One from multiple centers from Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, which included 359 elderly patients above 60 years of age, and were assigned to three groups, randomized to three groups. One group with sustained release carbamazepine, another with to levetiracetam, and third group was assigned to the lamotrigine group. The rate of discontinuation due to adverse effect was significantly higher in patients with sustained release carbamazepine as compared to that of levetiracetam and lamotrigine. There was no significant difference was found with respect to seizure freedom across the group. And the newer anti-epileptic drugs, the authors concluded that newer anti-epileptic drug, levetiracetam, is preferred as an initial monotherapy compared to lamotrigine and carbamazepine for newly diagnosed focal epilepsy in elderly because of better availability, tolerability. Sorry. The similar findings was seen in the fourth randomized control trial as well. In this, the fourth trial, the sustained release carbamazepine was used instead of carbamazepine, and there was no significant difference between the lamotrigine and carbamazepine with respect to seizure freedom. So this is another study, the medical treatment of epilepsy in elderly, a systematic review and meta-analysis. In this study, they analyzed 10 studies were included for the analysis, which included around 2,000 elderly patients with epilepsy, and they found lamotrigine was better tolerated than carbamazepine. Levetiracetam demonstrated higher probability of seizure freedom as compared to that of lamotrigine, with no significant difference in measures of tolerability. There was no significant difference between carbamazepine and levetiracetam in terms of efficacy and tolerability. There were single studies provided. Studies provide evidence for efficacy and or tolerability for other antiepileptic drugs in elderly, like brivaracetam, lacosamide, perampanel, and topiramate, but the data is insufficient. So more data are required to evaluate the newest generation antiepileptic drug and to compare the different AEDs, doses and titration schedules in elderly patients with epilepsy. More data is needed to examine the impact of common determinants such as frailty and neurodegenerative and cerebrovascular disease in this heterogeneous population. Coming to the role of epilepsy surgery in elderly patients. Although the limited data available on this topic, whatever the available data is there, it shows mixed results. Some studies have shown similar probability of seizure freedom and risk of post-operative complication as compared to that of younger age groups, while other studies have shown lower efficacy as well as slightly higher probability of cognitive, neurological, and other medical sequelae post-operatively. So this table shows the prominent studies published till now and with their results. Here you can see these two studies, one from the Germany and other from Thailand, have shown the higher incidence of neurological complications post-operatively, both neurological as well as neuropsychological, as compared to that of younger adults in elderly age group, while others have not shown significant difference with respect to the post-operative outcome, both in terms of seizure freedom as well as complications. So this was the latest review as well as the study which was from Cleveland, published in Epilepsia. In this study, they have reviewed 58 older patients reported in literature till now, and in addition, they reported the results of 64 older adults who underwent resective epilepsy surgery at their center. What they have found is that this was the largest cohort of resective epilepsy surgery reported till now in older adults, and they have found the outcomes to be similar to that of younger adults undergoing resective epilepsy surgery in routine clinical practice. Comparable seizure outcomes were achieved in older adults despite significantly longer duration of epilepsy and higher comorbidity burden. Post-resective epilepsy surgery, neuropsychological outcomes were similar to that of younger adults, except for more frequent decline in confrontational naming among older adults. There was no statistically significant difference in the resective epilepsy surgery related complications. However, one post-resective epilepsy surgery death in older group was a concerning finding. So, although with respect to epilepsy surgery, if the patient is selected properly and other comorbidities are addressed, the epilepsy surgery may have a good outcome. So concluding, epilepsy in old age is becoming increasingly common. With optimum management, and the most individuals will become seizure-free. Choice of antiepileptic drugs should be governed by type of the seizures, epilepsy syndrome, concomitant medications, associated comorbidities. With fewer drug interactions and less side effects, newer antiepileptic drugs might be a suitable first choice of treatment in older patients. Resective epilepsy surgery in well-selected older patients may be safe and effective. More data is required, and education of patients and their relatives can be helpful to maintain the quality of life and independence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pandu. I think that was a very comprehensive coverage, and you touched upon even epilepsy surgery in adults also. So, the cutoff age is 60.
Yeah.
That is what you said. People divide them into older adults and elderly. And elderly, some people have taken as 70, 75, 80. There are three cutoffs given. But in general, elderly means more than 60. That is what I understood from your talk. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
It's more than 60. Yeah. So that was wonderful. There are lots of questions which we'll take at the end. Now comes Jitupam. I hope we have certain questions for you both so that you can work on it so that you can give very crisp answers to the people who have posted that, both Pandu and Prashant. And by the time we'll hear Jitupam, you can just conclude. And there is no point in repeating everything what they have said because both the talks were very crisp and clear. Jitupam, please. Jitupam is assistant professor in the reputed institute PGI Chandigarh, and he was with us till 2 years back, and now he's assistant professor there. Welcome, Jitupam.
My screen is visible to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you, ma'am, for giving me this learning opportunity. To be honest, I don't have much thing to add because both the talks were very comprehensive and was in detail. But I'll be just summing up whatever we have discussed till now. First, the effect of choice of antiepileptic and their dose modification in case of renal and hepatic disease mainly depends on fraction that is eliminated by liver or kidney, and isoenzymes which are involved in their metabolism and extent of protein binding of the drug. And in case of renal, renal disease, the dose adjustment, creatinine clearance can be provide a good guidance for dose adjustment in case of renal disease. But however, in case of hepatic disease, there is no such marker. Now, coming to renal disease, there is reduced clearance of drugs or metabolites that are predominantly excreted in urine. And for drugs, those are excreted unchanged. Clearance of the drug and the creatinine clearance relationship is more or less linear. But however, this doesn't hold good in case of end-stage renal disease when non-renal clearance can also be affected. And in such cases, therapeutic drug monitoring can be misleading because of decreased protein, which causes increased fraction of unbound drug, and therapeutic drug monitoring can underestimate the active concentration of drug. Similarly, in hepatic involvement, what happened in hepatic metabolism is dependent on protein binding, activity of metabolic enzymes, and hepatic blood flow. However, these three factors doesn't correlate well with severity of any scale which measures severity of hepatic failure or any disease, any pathology which causes hepatic failure. So there is no marker such as creatinine clearance in case of hepatic disease to guide dose adjustment, and many of the time we have to depend on clinical scenarios to guide our dose of antiepileptic in case of hepatic disease. And hepatic metabolic enzymes are differently affected depending on severity of cirrhosis. However, when we talk about kidney and renal disease and epilepsy, two instances can happen. Either it can be an acute symptomatic seizure because of hepatic or renal disease, and people with epilepsy who develops hepatic and renal disease. In case of renal failure, acute symptomatic seizures can be either because of accumulation of toxic organic acids, uremic complications like dyselectrolytemia, malignant hypertension. It can be because of PRES, or those patients who are undergoing dialysis, it can be because of dialysis disequilibrium syndrome. In case of hepatic failure, this acute symptomatic seizure can be because of hepatic encephalopathy, maybe because of immunosuppressant toxicity in case of patient who received hepatic transplant. In either of the cases, the aim is to treat the cause which has precipitated this failure and reduction of toxic compounds which is precipitated these seizures. In the second instance, when people with epilepsy present with hepatic and renal failure, it is of more interest to a neurologist. And in this case, we can divide anti-epileptic drugs in 3 groups as previously discussed by Dr. Prasad. First group, we can classify those, we can keep those drugs which are exclusively excreted by kidney unchanged and liver has no role to play in their metabolism. So these drugs can be used safely in liver disease, gabapentin, pregabalin and vigabatrin, and their dose needs to be modified according to creatinine clearance. For example, in case of vigabatrin, dose needs to be reduced by 25%, 50% or 75% when creatinine clearance is 50 to 80, 30 to 50 or 10 to 30 ml per minute. Next group of drugs which are predominantly metabolized by liver. I am telling predominantly, not exclusively, because these drugs at max 10% is excreted unchanged urine and they don't require any dose modification in case of kidney disease. So in this group of drugs, important ones are like carbamazepine and phenytoin, in which cases therapeutic drug monitoring can be a good guide in dose adjustment, and one should try to keep the dose in lower level of the range of therapeutic drug level. Clobazam, here one should start with low dose at max 5 milligram per day, titrated not faster than every 7 days, and maximum dose not more than 20 to 40 milligram per day. Lamotrigine, here dose should be decreased by 25% in severe cirrhosis without ascites and by 50% in case of cirrhosis with ascites. Valproate, it should be avoided as far as possible. However, when all other whenever there is no other option left, dose needs to be reduced by at least 50% in moderate to severe cirrhosis. I hope this should answer Dr. Ravi's doubt about restarting valproate in case of liver failure. It should be avoided. However, when no other options left, at least 50% dose reduction. Brivaracetam, among neuroantiepileptic, brivaracetam, lower dose should be applied, but how much to be reduced, till now there is no such guideline available. Third group, where both kidney and liver plays a role in their metabolism. In this group of drug, important ones like lacosamide and parampenil, dose should be reduced when creatinine clearance less than 30 and lower dose in case of hepatic failure. Aceclidine, oxcarbazepine already discussed previously, dose needs to be reduced when there is creatinine clearance less than 60 and in case of hepatic failure. And coming to the next part, one of the important situation we face commonly, one a clinician face commonly, is when a patient is on dialysis. These are the drugs which are dialysable to various extents, and they need dose supplementation when a patient undergoes dialysis. In this group, commonly used antiepileptics like lacosamide, levetiracetam, topiramate, they are around 50% dialysable, and they need dose supplementation of at least 50% of daily dose after a standard 4-hour dialysis session. In case of gabapentin, dose supplementation should be equal to daily dose. Lamotrigine, post-dialysis supplementation dose may be needed, but how much percentage, 50% or till daily dose, that is not yet fixed. So I think for this thing, one is to judge on clinical decision. And the last part of this topic, some of the antiepileptic may produce hepatotoxicity or renal or kidney toxicity. In the hepatotoxic drugs like valproate and clobamate, we all know they are hepatotoxicity. And as Dr. Prasad has already addressed, phenytoin, carbamazepine, phenobarbital, they can present DRESS syndrome, multi-organ failure. This is basically an hypersensitivity reaction. So various literatures address this issue. Whenever these drugs is presented once with an toxic effect, it is safe to avoid these drugs in future because they have shown cross reactivity and there is higher chances of presentation of these side effects with another drug of the same group. Similarly, topiramate and jonissamide known to cause increase in ammonia level, and they are well known to cause kidney stones. So this for I will close. I will stop here to our first topic. Now coming to the second topic, epilepsy in elderly. This is an important topic because with improvement of better medical care, medical facility, number of elderly population is increasing, and so vis-a-vis there is increasing cases of elderly patient with epilepsy. So there are various difficulties in treating epilepsy patients because of their altered metabolism and various comorbidities. However, first complexity starts with the definition of elderly, whether it is 60 year or 65 year. Even earlier study, Rotterdam study, they took 55 year as the cutoff for elderly, but currently maximum developed nation take 65 years as cutoff for elderly, but United Nations take 60 years elderly. So I think 60 years should be taken as definition for elderly. And incidence and prevalence with age, incidence of epilepsy in elderly increases, peaks in more than 75 years, 1 to 2 per 1,000 person year, and higher prevalence of epilepsy is seen in elderly. It is 5.4 to 5.7 versus 0.76 in 100 people. In elderly, it is 5.4 to 5.7. However, it is only 0.76 in common population. Regarding primary generalized epilepsy in elderly, there is no several literature is addressed. It can be 3 to 5%, and some literature say 3 to 7% in elderly in sense of primary generalized epilepsy. And incidence of refractory epilepsy in elderly is less common to younger population. Only one study is there, Hernandez et al., which was published in Epilepsy Research in 2018. They have mentioned prevalence of refractory epilepsy in elderly is 20%, but however, in that study they found it in younger population it was 51%. So as we know, commonly it is 33% in general population with refractory epilepsy. It was found a little bit higher in this study, but however, we can say that presence of refractory epilepsy in elderly is less compared to younger population. Now, coming to etiology, it is a little bit different compared to younger people with epilepsy. As you can see here, acute symptomatic seizure maximum is contributed by cerebrovascular accident and metabolic disturbances. And the cause of epilepsy in elderly also maximum is contributed by cerebrovascular disease and non-vascular dementia, which is not so in younger population. Now, in diagnosis of epilepsy in elderly, there are some certain diagnostic challenges. Whenever we see a patient having generalized GTCS, we don't have any doubt it is a seizure. But in case of elderly, generalized seizures are rare. Aura can be a less characteristic one, less conspicuous, automatism can be less prominent, and there is prolonged in the post-ictal state. And also, there are various mimics which can present as seizure in elderly or various neurological conditions like TIA, TZA, hypoglycemia, syncope, sleep disorders, PNES. So all these things can mimic present as seizure. I only discussing about what are the investigations to be done in case of epilepsy in an elderly patient. But however, I want to tell that all the investigations whichever we are planning, those should be aimed to rule out all these mimics because they have implications in treatment. Now, before starting a treatment, certain considerations like older people presenting with seizure are more likely to re-seizure. Pharmacotherapy may be complicated, and considerations should be given to the implication of this diagnosis on their lifestyle. And first seizure in elderly, there is no difference in immediate versus deferred treatment. It was found in one of the study here. And one should give proper consideration for surgical intervention. Before starting therapy, one should know that there are certain pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic alterations like reduction in protein binding, hepatic metabolism. There is alteration in brain neurotransmitter or receptor functions, which may be important in taking decision regarding treatment of epilepsy in elderly. It was seen that elderly people with epilepsy, they have a very good response with antiepileptic drugs. Even monotherapy is in low dose can be sufficient for many patients, but tolerability becomes the major issue, and discontinuation of the drug because of various side effects becomes the main hindrance in optimal treatment of this patient. So in treatment, like which antiepileptic to start in which patient, it is more or less same as younger population, like which antiepileptic in generalized epilepsy or which anti-epileptic in focal epilepsy. I won't be giving in detail, but I will be highlighting certain points like these three studies where it was found that carbamazepine head-to-head comparison between carbamazepine and lamotrigine. It was found that lamotrigine and carbamazepine are equally effective, but dropout rate was least with lamotrigine because of fewer side effects compared to carbamazepine. However, these studies were before 2010. Now, coming to the latest studies, it was lacosamide versus carbamazepine sustained release preparation. It was found that better seizure freedom at 6 months with lacosamide, 72% versus 59%. And also, adverse event profile was better with lacosamide. It was 35% versus 52%. The latest meta-analysis, which was already discussed by Dr. Pandurang, it was seen that greatest likelihood of seizure freedom at 6 and 12 months was with lacosamide, lamotrigine, and levetiracetam. Highest discontinuation rate was seen with carbamazepine, both instant release and controlled release preparation. Lamotrigine is better tolerated relative to carbamazepine, and there is evidence for efficacy for brivaracetam, gabapentin, lacosamide, perampanel, and topiramate. Now, this is the summary of this, whatever we have discussed till now. Various societies has given their guidelines for anti-epileptic use in elderly, like AN and AES. There is class 1 level B evidence for lamotrigine. ILA class 3 level A evidence for gabapentin and lamotrigine. Here again, level B evidence for lamotrigine and levetiracetam. So you can say that lamotrigine and levetiracetam are good options for anti-epileptic use in case of epilepsy in elderly. Next, I think this is an important consideration which you should consider before starting treatment in case of epilepsy in elderly, because certain adverse events, in addition to common adverse event of epileptic anti-epileptic drugs, these are the certain adverse events which can be more important to consider in case of elderly because they can be more debilitating or they can be more problematic in case of elderly, like cognition and behavioral effect of phenobarbital or levetiracetam, sedation in case of phenytoin, phenobarbital, or zonisamide, hyponatremia with carbamazepine, bone loss with phenobarb, phenytoin, and valproate, Parkinsonism and tremor in case of valproate, and insomnia and lamotrigine. These are in addition to the common side effect whichever we see in these drugs. Next, coming to epilepsy surgery in elderly, there was common belief that surgery is relatively less often performed in elderly because seizure is relatively easily controlled with anti-epileptic. Associated comorbidities, surgical complication risk, and social factors are less relevant like driving or employment. But however, the trend is changing. As we can see here, several studies which has addressed this issue, epilepsy surgery in elderly. From 2000, it was surgical outcome with more than 50 year versus less than 50 year. Surgical outcome was more in favor of younger population, which was statistically significant. In 2006, there was no difference of seizure freedom among elderly versus younger population. And the latest one in 2018, where around 58 elderly patients was compared with younger population. 1 year angle class 1 outcome was 72%. 3.2 year angle class 1 outcome was 80% in favor of elderly. And only adverse event which was more common in elderly was higher confrontational damage. So age should not be a factor to deny epilepsy surgery in well-selected cases in epilepsy in elderly. Next, certain specific epilepsy syndrome which are more commonly seen in elderly, like dementia-associated epilepsy. In dementia, there is higher prevalence of epilepsy, most commonly seen in Alzheimer's disease. In those patients 65 year plus with Alzheimer's disease have tenfold higher risk of getting a seizure compared to normal population of the same age group. In various type of dementia, epilepsy is most common with Alzheimer's, followed by vascular cognitive impairment, followed by frontotemporal dementia. And treatment consideration in case of such patient, lamotrigine and levetiracetam should be a good option. However, as we have already mentioned that behavioral and cognitive issues what we can face with levetiracetam should be considered before starting the treatment. Valproate may be difficult because of its side effect profile in case of elderly. Second is autoimmune epilepsy, anti-GABA-B receptor, anti-AMPA receptor, anti-IGI1, and anti-CASPR2 are more common compared to anti-NMDA or anti-glycine, always associated, maximum time associated with cognitive symptoms, and investigations should be done to rule out malignancy. Third, transient epileptic amnesia. It can be sometimes confused with transient global amnesia. However, proper clinical history can differentiate between these two things. Transient epileptic amnesia lasts for less than 1 hour, recurrent, stereotypical, usually seen in early morning, associated with retrograde amnesia compared to anterograde amnesia in case of TGA, and low dose of antiepileptic can be very helpful in this condition. Lastly, epilepsy is common in later life, have good seizure control with optimal treatment. Choice of antiepileptics should be governed by seizure type, concomitant medication, coexisting disease and side effect profile, and comorbidities like cognitive, psychiatric, and systemic comorbidities needs to be taken care of. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for summing it up. And you brought up certain points very clearly also. More than the efficacy, it is the tolerability or the adverse effect profile that is more important in elderly. And a very small dose of an older AED or the newer AED, somebody was putting forth lamotrigine and all, lamotrigine or levetiracetam or even your lacosamide can be used. That is what I understood. So we have a lot of questions put out here. We'll try to answer at least a few of them which are pertinent, and already a few people have addressed it, especially Jidubam has addressed most of that. We will omit that. So shall I take the questions one by one? 1 second. So I've just put out a query here because we come across that very often. Alkaline phosphatase is increased, and especially when somebody is going for surgery, the surgeon always keeps asking why the ALP is increased. So how to go about it, whether it is from liver or bone, or is it significant, or seeing the ALP which is highly increased, would you like to decrease the dosage of drug? Who wants to take that? Prashant?
ALP is increased with cholestatic liver injury as well as from injury to the bone. So as such, the antiepileptic drug which increase ALP, valproate is hepatotoxic in the hepatocellular phase. It will not cause cholestasis. I have shown that in the slides. The drug causing cholestasis is phenytoin and carbamazepine. So ALP can be high in phenytoin and carbamazepine, but as such, phenytoin carbamazepine induced cholestatic hepatitis is in fact very, very rare. So if there is an ALP elevation and patient on AED, always rule out other cause of ALP elevation. And if nothing is found, then phenytoin and carbamazepine may do that. So practically it is some other cause other than antiepileptic drug.
Yeah, so that can be an asymptomatic elevation, I suppose. And if the patient is asymptomatic, I don't think we have to modify the dosage of medicine. For long-term use of antiepileptic drugs, the liver ALP can be increased, but if
that
the
may be due
patient
to
is
bone
remaining,
disease cells. That may be due to the
exactly,
osteomalacias.
Yeah, you
That
cannot
is more
say
like
disease. Yeah, the bone release of alkaline phosphatase. So, is there any way of differentiating between bone and liver ALP?
I don't know, madam. If GGT is increased, it is most likely liver. That is what I think.
GGT, I think it is linked to alcoholism. Anybody wants to GGT plus ALP, you mean?
Yeah.
The isoenzymes differ, but there is no way in India whereby we can rule out this bone release. So bone irritation causing it, but if it is asymptomatic with all the other liver enzymes perfectly normal and the bone function is also normal, leave them as such. You don't have to interfere. That's what I understood. What is the choice of drug in both hepatic and renal failure? Who wants to take that?
That may be difficult because the drug is either metabolized through liver or through kidney. So the drug of choice is maybe either levetiracetam or oxcarbazepine at a reduced dose.
Will depend upon both the liver enzymes and the creatinine clearance and keep on adjusting the dose. There is a, I think people have answered that. Can you elaborate on lacosamide? This is from Rajesh here. On lacosamide, as I'm using this quite often. Rajesh using it is not the question here. What is the effect of lacosamide on liver enzyme elevation?
Lacosamide is metabolized predominantly through liver. I had shown that dose adjustment is required even in mild and moderate hepatic impairment, also in severe renal impairment. As such, any drug can be hepatotoxic, though we largely consider phenytoin, carbamazepine, and valproate to be the hepatotoxic drug. Lacosamide-induced hepatotoxicity is in fact rare. If SGPT is elevated, if it is more than 3 times elevated, the drug will have to be stopped because it is hepatotoxicity. If it is less than that, follow up the patient. If it is persistently elevated even after 3 to 6 months of follow-up, if possible, change to an alternate drug like levetiracetam or topiramate, which is not hepatotoxic. Lacosamide may cause SGPT elevation because it is metabolized in liver.
So Bhaiya, why are you so much attached to this lacosamide business? Huh?
Well, it's a wonderful drug.
Oh,
Doesn't
I
cause
see.
difference,
Okay. Your personal experience. Okay. Then I have a long question which I tried to put it very shortly. It is from Jeffrey. It is written, but Jafar, I think. A 35-year-old male with the complex partial seizures, extratemporal in remission for 3 years on carbamazepine monotherapy, 600 milligram. Was normal in all 6 months follow-up. 5 such follow-ups while on carbamazepine. During last follow-up a month ago, his SGPT was 250. I did not understand it. Anyway, we'll take it as 600 milligram carbamazepine. SGPT is 250. What to do? This will be the last question to Prashant. Poor Prashant.
It is extremely unlikely that this SGPT is due to carbamazepine because he had been on 3 years without much of hepatotoxicity. Hope it was probably monitored in between. So hepatotoxicity of most of the carbamazepine usually comes in the first 6 months, while phenytoin carbamazepine usually comes initial phases, and that is usually a part of reactive metabolic syndrome. Very rarely only, maybe less than 10% of the cases only, delayed toxicity can occur. So when 35-year-old male presenting with hepatotoxicity first time after 3 years, SGPT 250 while only on carbamazepine, first rule out other causes of hepatotoxicity like NASH, alcoholism, other drugs like NSAIDs, etc. If nothing is found and carbamazepine is said to be the culprit, then you will have to change carbamazepine to a less hepatotoxic drug like oxcarbazepine.
Prashant, do you want to say that you will keep on checking the LFT in somebody who is on enzyme-inducing drugs? That is what you want to say?
No, madam.
I don't think that is advocated anywhere unless the patient is symptomatic. No one will advocate a regular LFT unless you want to make money through some labs. So that should not be the take-home message for the juniors here.
What I told is, if SGPT is elevated first time, getting elevated after 3 years, it is unlikely to be due to carbamazepine. Carbamazepine-induced enzyme elevations are initially in the early stages, and that often occurs as a part of DRESS. So it is extremely unlikely that this SGPT is due to carbamazepine.
Okay. So we are not going to test anybody with recurrent LFT, RFT, and all those stuff. I mean, that is not the practice that is followed anyway. So this is a continuation of the previous question. So once somebody develops a hepato or renal toxicity, can you re-challenge with any of the old or newer ADs? If so, why and how? If not, why? Jitupam or Prashant or anybody can answer.
Let Jitupam answer.
Ma'am, if there is, because of toxicity, because of an anti-epileptic drug, like Prashant has already discussed about DRESS, carbamazepine, phenytoin, or phenobarb. In those cases, ma'am, it is better to avoid these drugs because they have cross sensitivity. So if one drug is precipitate DRESS in 1%, is likely that the other drugs also may precipitate similar kind of allergic or reaction to this person. So it is better to avoid in such cases. Can add up anything?
So what is the mechanism? Somebody had a tuberculous meningitis and seizures also. So they developed hepatotoxicity, and then we gave a modified ATP, and that was resolved. We didn't know at the beginning whether it was due to the associated phenytoin the patient was taking. So why can't you restart on phenytoin rather than a new drug like lacosamide, which Rajesh is going to start off? If patient is getting seizures, while on phenytoin, he was quite okay for 3 months or 6 months. So that is a question. So can we re-challenge in such situations? So what is the mechanism by which these drugs cause hepatotoxicity?
In case of carbamazepine and this aromatic compounds, they can transform into aromatic compounds which causes this hepatotoxicity. So, in with these drugs, if there is only increase in AST, ALT, then we think drug-induced hepatitis, we should go by the management of drug-induced hepatitis. And once this liver enzymes comes down, we may re-challenge if there is no other option, but better to be safer side, I would go for avoiding these drugs.
Okay. Anyway, Prashant will answer that question in the next session. The question you can
I
take
will
it
answer
from there.
itself. Madam.
Okay, no problem.
These hepatotoxicity of phenytoin and carbamazepine are due to idiosyncrasy and drug should not be rechallenged.
Very good. The rest of the drugs can be rechallenged in very low doses. Both these are idiosyncratic. So that is the answer. The rest of it people can go and read. So it's not like you cannot touch on that. But I think Jitupam told at the end that if one is phenytoin to which the patient has badly reacted, better not to go with carbamazepine because they have something in common. The next one is my God, so much is there. I saw one question. What about idiopathic generalized epilepsy in the elderly? What is the incidence, prevalence? Prashant's turn is over. Now,
It
where
is,
is Pandu?
It is around 3 to 5% in several studies. They have mentioned it is 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5%. But
3 to 5%.
yes, ma'am. And the oldest one is reported as a 76-year-old. That person presented as, it is a case report only, we presented in myoclonus and they actually labeled it as idiopathic generalized epilepsy. But to be precise, nothing is here, 3 to 5% in one study 3 to 7%. So,
So what about these JME patients? That was another question which I could not find out here.
Yes, ma'am.
What percentage of JME patients come out of the drug? And what percentage of JME patients go on to have that rate for the entire life? That is the answer for that question, no? Suppose somebody is having an idiopathic generalized epilepsy, starting in teens, and then they are on drugs till 30, 35. Most of us lose track of the patient after that. So this patient can live up to 80 years. So that 80-year-old patient who was symptomatic from 17 years of age, is that the way this incidence and prevalence has been calculated? So is there any longitudinal follow-up studies? Usually this comes from Rochester, Minnesota. I have no idea, but I don't think it is there because somebody had put that question. I was also checking here. I didn't see anything. Did any of you read? Any other person also can answer? This 2 to 7% is a magic number from, but where it is all from, I think, cross-sectional studies, no?
Yes, ma'am.
We don't have any cross-sectional.
No, these are cross-sectional studies.
So it's not like a JME cohort followed up through the entire life.
No,
so that is one part of it. The other part is IgE developing after 60 years of age. That was another question. That is this 2 to 7%.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
That was I was
Probably.
Yes.
Because it's cross-sectional. They haven't said, this is, you're talking about one Martin Brody study in which they found 2 to 7%. Whether what age they developed, we have no idea. When they looked into all the seizures, they found it. Then what is the question? Seizures in dementia. I think sir has asked, Anup sir. Seizures in dementia also is a problem in elderly, especially late Alzheimer's. What would be your approach? So I think sir Chitupam has already covered that. Can you just brief it up into a
actually, Alzheimer's disease commonly associated with dementia. Young onset familial Alzheimer's disease, they have 87-fold higher risk of getting seizure. Above 65 years, Alzheimer's disease 10-fold higher risk compared to age-matched population. Anti-epileptic drugs, levetiracetam, lamotrigine. I will prefer lamotrigine is good option because of levetiracetam, this cognitive and behavioral side effect. That's all I want to comment on that.
So, if it's a post-stroke epilepsy, this particular session, we are talking only about elderly patients. It's not post-stroke in a young patient and all. Post-stroke epilepsy, when to stop? I think not only in stroke, but in all the other conditions, it is better to continue the drug in a small dose. Is there any objection regarding that, all the three speakers?
No, ma'am. This is right, ma'am, because there is higher chances of recurrence compared to younger population. They do good with very low dose of anti-epileptics. And unless there is any unavoidable side effect or serious side effect, it is better to continue for long term not to stop the
So,
antiepileptic.
are there any studies in which, whatever be the etiology, the seizures in elderly, when to withdraw the drug or phase it out? Is there any study touching upon that? All three of you? I don't think it is there.
Ma'am, I have not gone through, ma'am. I have not gone.
Pandu, Prashant?
Actually, most of
Prashant?
these patients with elderly patients, they have
Uh.
symptomatic epilepsy, and
Yeah.
because of that, and withdrawing of antiepileptic drug in elderly is maybe very difficult.
Dangerous
And it is,
also. One fall and they will
dangerous,
have,
yeah.
yeah. So I
And
don't
it
think,
should be continued.
and it is evidence based also. They don't advocate stopping of the drug.
Yeah,
Probably
yeah.
due to adverse effects, you can, maybe dose alteration is possible, and preferably monotherapy rather than
Yeah.
polytherapy. So I think, can we wind up with that, because there are one or two more, but they are all related. Anybody wants to come up with one or two questions? Two questions can be permitted for the interest of time. But it was a very excellent session. I think all three of the
No,
speakers did
Asha,
very well. Yeah. Saroja ma'am.
can I
Yes,
ask
ma'am.
one question? Yeah, I was
Sure.
not able to type. I just want to know that all these patients also have additional ataxia already and they have cardiac involvement. So most of them have IHD. This is what we find in post-stroke seizures. They have concurrent IHD and sometimes it's difficult to control only with one drug. And especially when they come with NORS, no, when we are following them up, it's difficult to bring down the anti-epileptic medication. This is a very difficult problem for us, that the combination of medication and then associated hepatic renal is okay. They also have cardiac conditions which which make us think which combination we should use and what should be the dose. And these are some of the problems. And post-stroke seizures, we see them coming up again and again with recurrent seizures. That is when we have a difficulty choosing additional drugs. So can anybody answer that?
Yeah. Who wants to take it up?
Yeah.
All are quiet.
Ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Regarding combination of therapy, actually, ma'am, not only combination of anti-epileptic, other drugs also. Many of these people are on other drugs, like some of them will be on warfarin, somebody will be on aspirin. So deciding on the drugs will be based on this: what are the other drugs patient is on, and what are the combination of anti-epileptic we are going to use. So it is safer to not to go for enzyme inducers like carbamazepine or phenytoin in such cases. Suppose in a patient when you have to combine, suppose lamotrigine plus levetiracetam combination, that will be, I think this will be a safe combination because the side effect profile is better. Levetiracetam is more or less inert in relation to enzyme induction and enzyme induction and interaction with other drugs. So I think if combination first choice, I will go for lamotrigine levetiracetam combination. Gabapentin can be a little bit helpful because gabapentin sometimes it helps in ataxia also, like in ataxia also. So gabapentin, I have not personally, I don't have any personal experience about use of gabapentin in elderly epilepsy, but literature whatever is showing, gabapentin is shown to be a good drug for epilepsy in elderly. That can be an
Does
option.
anybody have?
Can I make a comment?
Yeah. After you all make, I'll just add on to that. Yeah. Tell me, Prashant. Carry on, Prashant.
As such, no anti-epileptic drug is cardiotoxic. It can cause cardiac electrical complications, like there may be PR prolongation with lacosamide, but that is not seen in the usual healthy patient. If there is an already pre-existing PR interval prolongation, it may further prolong the PR interval, and this is largely seen at doses more than 400 milligram. So even lacosamide is safe unless there is a pre-existing PR prolongation. QT prolongation is not seen in most of the anti-epileptic drugs. In patients who have a pre-existing sodium channelopathy affecting heart, sodium channel blockers may prolong the QT interval. Otherwise, there is no QT prolongation. PR interval is lacosamide, that too on higher doses in patients who already have pre-existing PR prolongation. So as such, no AEDs are cardiotoxic.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
sometime back we were looking into post-stroke seizures, and I think the thing is very valid because following stroke, a gliosis develops, and gliosis is said to be one of the most epileptogenic lesion as compared to glioneuronal tumors and MTS and all. So that is the question that we put forth first. Why is post-stroke seizures very difficult to control? Because of that gliosis or the scar epilepsy which is developing in due course of time. That is first one. And many of the times we might require 2 or even 3 drugs to control. And there is no hard and fast rule. We only generalized that monotherapy may be ideal, but in such situations, you may have to go for duotherapy. And third question of yours was ataxia, that somebody also had put it out there. So ataxia, when it is there, the ones which are known to be cerebellar toxic, that is especially carbamazepine and oxcarbazepine to not to a major extent, and the other one is phenytoin. Such drugs can be either taken out or their dose can be minimized. So we need a primary drug and a secondary drug to conclude, and they should have both 2 different mechanisms of action, as we usually do, and their adverse effect profile also should be suiting to the patient. So you can have any of these combinations, but preferably they should have 2 mechanisms of action. So that is how we go about it, and maybe we'll be writing up that paper very soon, but I don't have the results right now. But as such, it is very difficult to control, and most of the people come back with seizures, and their major problem becomes seizures in the later part of life after they develop a stroke. So that is what I can say. So you can use a duotherapy or even a triple therapy I've seen most patients. So it's true that it is very difficult to control. So anyone else? One more question. Okay, so with that, I think it was wonderful. Everyone kept the time. The questions took more time. And I think this is a very important session, because most of us deal with adult patients in ICUs where there are multiple problems, and you get consultations from the medical side or the surgical side and all. And these 3 people have done complete justice to the whole thing, and they were very crisp and clear. And the rest of it, I think, back we can go and read. So the next session will be the 4th Saturday. So we'll see on 4th Saturday, and good night, and thank you all. Thanks so much.